The horse stumbled as it crested the final rise, foam streaking its flanks, ribs straining beneath a coat mottled with dust and blood. Jack Rowe shifted his weight in the saddle, feeling the animal falter beneath him. Ash Hollow lay ahead, a thin smudge of life in the vast, merciless sweep of the prairie, as if the earth itself had given up trying to remember it. He hadn't meant to come here. Truth be told, Jack hadn't meant to come anywhere anymore. The wind whispered dead men's names in his ear, a choir of regret, and he answered them with silence. The town greeted him with the wary stillness of a place that had seen too much and survived too little. Boarded windows sagged on their hinges. The general store's sign dangled from a single chain, creaking like an old man's knees. A pair of dirty boys paused their game of marbles to gawk at the stranger, their hands frozen mid-snap. Jack caught a glimpse of their expressions: curiosity, fear, the electric thrill of danger. His boots thudded heavily against the packed dirt as he dismounted, one hand brushing the worn leather of his holster. A half-dozen eyes watched him from the shadows: merchants, drunks, desperate men who knew better than to draw attention. Jack straightened his battered hat and walked toward the only building that seemed alive, a saloon with peeling paint and a tarnished tin lantern swinging above the door. The Silver Lantern. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and sweat, the scent of stale whiskey soaking the floorboards. The piano sat silent in the corner, keys chipped like broken teeth. Men hunched over drinks, muttering, heads ducked low. The moment Jack entered, the room tensed as if a knife had been drawn. He moved with the slow, unhurried steps of a man who knew the stakes and didn't much care. At the bar, a woman wiped down glasses with a cloth that looked as tired as she did. She wore a faded blue dress, simple and sturdy, her hair pinned back in a severe knot. Lines etched her face, but her eyes were sharp, calculating, untouched by time's mercy. Clara Templeton. Jack tossed a small, blood-spotted pouch onto the counter. The coins within clinked dully. Room. Whiskey. Maybe a reason not to keep writing. Clara glanced at the pouch, then at the man before her. Her hands stilled. "You look like a man who's lost more than money." Jack allowed himself a grim smirk. "Ain't wrong." A heavy-set gambler, nursing his fourth drink, stumbled toward Jack, emboldened by the stranger's battered appearance. "You think you can just buy a bed and respect in Ash Hollow," he slurred, slapping a thick hand onto Jack's shoulder. Without looking, Jack caught the man's wrist in a vice grip and twisted. The gambler yelped, crumpling to the floor. Jack's revolver stayed holstered, but his message was clear. He was not prey. Murmurs rippled through the saloon. The barkeep chuckled dryly. A drunk in the corner muttered, "Mean as a rattler, that one." Clara set a glass in front of Jack, careful not to let her fingers brush his. "You don't want to make enemies here, mister," she said, voice low. "Lady," Jack rasped, tipping back the whiskey. "I got more enemies than friends. Figure it's time I even the score." He took the key. She slid across the bar, nodding once. He was halfway up the narrow staircase when the first shot shattered the window. Chaos erupted. Masked riders poured into Ash Hollow like a plague. Pistols barked. Glass shattered. Men screamed. Jack dove flat against the railing, drawing his weapon in a fluid, bone-deep motion. Bullets whined past him, carving splinters from the saloon's heavy beams. From the corner of his eye, Jack saw Clara drop behind the bar, dragging an old scattergun from beneath the counter. She racked it with the confidence of someone who'd used it before. The town's defenders were few, desperate, ill-prepared. Jack moved on instinct. He dropped two riders as they burst through the door, the retorts of his revolver deafening. Sweat stung his eyes. His wounded leg throbbed, threatening to buckle. But he stayed on his feet. A dark figure on horseback loomed at the entrance, surveying the wreckage. For a moment, Jack's heart stuttered. He knew that silhouette, the slope of the shoulders, the casual cruelty in the set of the mouth beneath the bandana. Wade Thatcher. Jack cursed under his breath. He had thought Thatcher dead, left to rot after the betrayal that had ended so many innocent lives. Yet here he was, alive and leading men into ruin again. Thatcher met Jack's stare across the smoke and ruin, eyes gleaming with mockery. Then, just as quickly, he turned and spurred his horse into the street, leaving his men to finish the job. Jack fired after him, but missed. His gun clicked empty. Another outlaw lunged from a stairwell. Jack met him with a savage elbow, then dragged the man's own knife across his throat before tossing the body aside like refuse. The gunfire slowed. The attackers withdrew, regrouping, melting into the night. They hadn't come to conquer. They had come to warn. Jack slumped against the bar, blood seeping from a fresh cut on his temple. Clara stood nearby, her shotgun still at the ready, her jaw tight. "You bring this trouble with you?" she asked, voice calm but edged with steel. "Looks that way," Jack grunted. "You planning to run?" Jack wiped his mouth, tasted blood and dust. Ran long enough. For a long moment, they regarded each other, two survivors adrift in a world that had long since stopped caring. Jack saw the questions flicker behind Clara's steady gaze. She wasn't afraid. She was calculating. "There's a room upstairs," she said finally. 12 steps down the hall, third door on the left. Jack nodded, pocketing the key without looking. He moved toward the stairs, each step dragging at him like chains. At the landing, he turned. "Why help me?" he asked, voice rough. Clara shrugged one shoulder, the movement weary, practical. "Maybe because you look like a man who's lost more than he can carry. Maybe because folks like us don't have much left but the fight." Outside, the town smoldered in the dark, wounded but unbroken. The wind shifted, carrying with it the sharp tang of gunpowder and something else. Hope, fragile and bitter. Jack climbed the stairs, each creaking step a small act of defiance against the ghosts clawing at his heels. Ash Hollow had found itself a reluctant defender. And Jack Rowe, for the first time in a long while, had found a place he might be willing to bleed for. The town woke with a groan, licking its wounds as the sun dragged itself over the horizon. Broken windows gaped like missing teeth along Main Street. A toppled wagon smoldered outside the Silver Lantern, filling the air with the bitter stench of charred wood. Jack sat on the porch, cradling his stitched-up side, watching the battered townfolk drag debris into uneven piles. Ash Hollow wasn't dead yet. Damned if that didn't feel like a challenge. The door creaked behind him. Clara stepped onto the porch, balancing 2 tin cups of steaming coffee. She handed him one without a word, her hands rough and steady. Jack accepted it, savoring the burn on his tongue. Pain, at least, meant he was still here. "You're lucky," Clara said, eyeing the blood-stained bandage on his ribs. "Another inch, and you'd be drinking cloud water." Jack grunted. "Would have saved you the trouble." She snorted, a sound that wasn't quite laughter. "We're short on men who can shoot straight and don't fold at the knees." Jack sipped his coffee and watched a boy hammer a broken shutter back into place with more grit than skill. Somewhere in the shifting dust, the pieces of the night came into focus. Wade Thatcher, leading a pack of outlaws bold enough to raid a town, but cautious enough to retreat before finishing the job. That meant something was coming. Something worse. "You know him," Clara said, watching him watch the horizon. Jack nodded. "Name's Wade Thatcher. Used to ride with me. Long time ago. He part of whatever sent you limping into my town." Jack didn't answer right away. Memories pressed hard against his chest. Gunfire, betrayal, blood on clean hands. He turned the cup between his palms, feeling the rough edges of truth catch at him. "He's the reason I stopped believing a man could do good and live long enough to regret it." Clara studied him, the lines at the corners of her eyes deepening. Jack wondered what she saw, a broken man playing at survival, or just another dangerous fool headed for an early grave. "He's not done," she said finally, voice flat. "He was scouting." "I know. You planning to leave before he comes back?" Jack stared into his cup as if it might offer answers. Thatcher hadn't just stumbled across Ash Hollow. He was hunting something or someone. "I ain't running," Jack said, and realized as he spoke that it was true. He was tired of running, tired of leaving behind ruins and calling it survival. Clara leaned against the post, arms crossed. "Good. Because if you go, we die." Simple words. Heavy truth. No begging, no dramatics. Just a woman stating a fact. offering a partnership neither asked for but both needed. A dry wind swept down the street, rattling the loose boards, carrying with it the ghost of gunfire and screams. Jack drained his coffee and stood, feeling the stiffness in his joints, the steady throb of the wound in his side. "You got men?" he asked. Clara shook her head. "Got old farmers, a drunk preacher, and a kid who can't hit a tin can at 10 paces. Jack smiled without humor. "Might be enough, if they're mean and lucky." She gave him a long, considering look. "We're stubborn. That count." "Stubborn gets you halfway," Jack said. "The rest is learning to kill without blinking." For the first time, Clara hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty passing over her face. Jack didn't blame her. Most people, when you stripped away the noise, weren't killers. They just pretended until the moment came. "Why'd you stay?" Jack asked, curious despite himself. "Town's dying. Could have lit out like the others." Clara's mouth tightened. Her gaze shifted to the hills beyond town, the place where the prairie swallowed men whole. "My husband's buried here," she said quietly. "One boy dead, before he grew into his boots. Other one he left, chased after promises written in blood and gold." Her voice broke just for a second, before she swallowed it down. "I got no illusions left, mister. Only thing I got is this patch of dirt and a few stubborn souls who call a home. I ain't leaving." Jack felt the weight of her words settle inside him, filling some hollow he'd stopped acknowledging. He set his cup down and adjusted the battered hat on his head. "Then we make a stand." The words sounded foolish in his ears, suicidal even. But in Clara's steady gaze, he saw something he hadn't felt in a long time, a reason. They worked through the morning, taking stock. 24 souls willing to fight, if only because there was no place else left to run. They gathered rifles, so Rusted Jack had to squint to recognize them. Ammunition was scarce, food scarcer. Hope, he thought grimly, was thinner still. They trained in the dust and heat. Jack barked orders with the sharpness of a man who'd seen what happened to dreamers who didn't shoot fast enough. The townsfolk stumbled, cursed, picked themselves up again. A grizzled prospector named Otis nearly blew himself sky-high, trying to wire dynamite to a fence post. Jack caught him just in time, slapping the blasting caps from his hands. "You trying to kill us early, old man?" Jack snapped. Otis just cackled, unfazed. "Just adding a little flavor to the stew." Clara stood nearby, arms folded, mouth twitching in a ghost of a smile. For a moment, Jack almost forgot the blood waiting for them beyond the hills. As the sun sagged low, Jack limped into the saloon. Clara followed, both of them worn to the bone. She poured him a drink without asking, and he accepted it like a communion. "You sure about this?" she asked, voice low. Jack stared at the cracked mirror behind the bar. In its warped reflection, he barely recognized himself, leaner, harder, a man clawing his way back to something that might resemble a soul. "I'm sure," he said. Clara leaned in, her voice rough with something like hope. "You get us through this, and you'll have earned more than a bed and whiskey." Jack raised an eyebrow. "That right?" She nodded once. "You'll have a place, maybe even a future." The word struck him like a fist to the gut. Future. He'd stopped thinking about such things years ago, when blood and betrayal had soured the very idea. And yet, Clara spoke it like a fact, not a wish. A commotion outside drew them both to the door. Dust clouds swirled on the horizon. Horses. Riders. Jack felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. They were coming back. Clara handed him a rifle. Her hand brushed his just for a moment. Calloused, firm, steady. "Whatever happens," she said, voice low, "we fight." Jack chambered around and stepped onto the porch. The setting sun painted the dust red, and in that blood-colored light, he saw the shape of the future laid bare, brutal, uncertain, but theirs to claim if they had the guts to take it. Behind him, Clara closed the door gently, as if sealing them into fate itself. Jack tightened his grip on the rifle and squared his shoulders. Old ghosts were riding in, but Jack Rowe wasn't planning to run this time. The night fell heavy over Ash Hollow, thick with the scent of oil lamps and gun oil. Jack stood on the rickety porch, his battered hat pulled low, watching the dust clouds in the distance fade into darkness. The outlaws hadn't attacked yet. They were waiting, circling, probing for weakness. Jack could feel them out there, like wolves scenting blood. It was only a matter of time. Inside the silver lantern, the townsfolk gathered, faces grim under the yellow light. Clara moved among them like a quiet storm, handing out rifles, assigning posts, calming fears with a steady hand. Jack watched her work, marveling at the stubborn gravity she commanded. These people trusted her, and somehow, by extension, they were beginning to trust him. He didn't know how to feel about that. The night dragged on. Jack drilled them in short, brutal sessions, how to fire from cover, how to retreat without turning their backs, how to survive when the killing started. His voice cracked like a whip across the dusty saloon, driving the lessons deep. "Shoot to live," he barked, slamming the butt of his rifle against a broken table they used for target practice. "You miss, you die. You hesitate, you die. You think this is a game, you'll damn well find out different." Otis, the old prospector, grinned toothlessly and raised his hand. "What about praying, mister?" Jack's mouth twitched. "Pray all you want. Just pull the trigger first." Laughter rippled through the room, thin but genuine. It was a small thing, but Jack caught the flicker of hope in their faces. Hope was dangerous, he knew, but maybe it was necessary, too. Later, he found himself alone behind the saloon, staring up at the stars. They hung like frozen lanterns in the velvet sky, distant and cold. Jack wondered if there was a God in all that emptiness, and if so, what he thought of men like him. Footsteps crunched the gravel. Clara joined him, a blanket draped over her shoulders against the creeping chill. For a long moment, they said nothing, letting the silence settle between them. "You weren't always like this," she said finally, voice low. Jack kept his gaze skyward. "No, I was worse." She chuckled softly. "You're a hard man to like, Jack Rowe." He tipped his head toward her, a shadow of a smile touching his lips. "Didn't come here to be liked. What did you come for?" The question lingered in the cold air. Jack didn't have an answer, not one that made sense. Maybe he'd ridden into Ash Hollow looking for a place to die. Maybe something in him, buried so deep he couldn't name it, wanted something more. "I figured I was past saving," he said at last. "Maybe still am." Clara shifted, the blanket falling from one shoulder. In the dim light, her face was carved from stone and sorrow. "You're not past anything," she said. "Not yet." Her words lodged in his chest, a splinter he couldn't pull free. Before he could answer, the bells started clanging from the church steeple, a frantic, urgent warning. Jack spun, instincts flaring. In the darkness beyond the town, lanterns bobbed like fireflies. Horses snorted. Metal clinked. The outlaws were moving. He barked orders, snapping the townsfolk into motion. Clara disappeared into the saloon, emerging moments later with her shotgun slung across her back. Jack watched her stride into the square, fearless as any man he'd ever fought beside. Ash Hollow's defenders took their positions behind overturned wagons, behind sandbags hastily stacked against the main street. Jack limped to the front, his revolver already in his hand. The enemy crept closer, silhouettes against the dust-choked moonlight. Jack counted at least 30 riders. Too many. Far too many. A rider broke from the pack, riding forward with a cocky ease that turned Jack's stomach. Wade Thatcher. He stopped just out of rifle range, lifting a bullhorn to his mouth. "Listen close, Ash Hollow." His voice rang across the empty space, laced with mockery. "We're here for one man. You hand him over, and the rest of you can walk away." Jack didn't move. Around him, the townsfolk stirred, uncertain. "Name's Jack Rowe," Thatcher called, savoring it. "Old friend of mine. Made some bad choices. Time's come to settle accounts." A dozen pairs of eyes turned toward Jack, searching, doubting. Jack stepped forward, letting the lantern light catch his battered face. "I'm right here, Thatcher," he shouted back, voice cold and steady. "Come and get me." The outlaws murmured among themselves. Thatcher sat his horse like a man pondering options, tapping the bullhorn against his thigh. Then he laughed, a dry, humorless bark that skittered across the night like a crow. "So be it." He dropped the bullhorn and spurred his horse into a charge. The world erupted into chaos. Jack shouted for the townsfolk to hold their fire until the riders were close enough to smell. He crouched behind a broken wagon, squeezing off shots with brutal precision. One outlaw tumbled from his saddle, another spun with a scream. The townsfolk fought like cornered animals, fear sharpening into ferocity. Clara moved among them, reloading rifles, shouting encouragement, blasting with her shotgun when the riders pressed too close. Jack lost track of time, lost himself in the rhythm of survival. Fire, reload, move. Fire, reload, move. A bullet grazed his arm. Another tore a chunk from the wagon beside his head. Blood roared in his ears, drowning out everything but the pounding of his heart. Somewhere, Otis hooped as he lit a bundle of dynamite and hurled it into the street. The explosion rocked the town, sending dust and bodies flying. Through the smoke, Jack saw Thatcher charging straight for him, pistol raised. Their eyes locked across the battlefield. Two men bound by blood and betrayal. Jack pushed off the wagon, meeting Thatcher head-on. The impact knocked him sprawling. He rolled, firing blind, missing. Thatcher's boot caught him in the ribs, driving the breath from his lungs. Jack twisted, grabbing Thatcher's arm, yanking him down into the dirt. They grappled like dogs, fists and knives flashing. Jack tasted blood, felt ribs crack under punishing blows. Thatcher laughed as he pressed the knife closer to Jack's throat. "Should have stayed dead, Ro." Jack growled and drove his forehead into Thatcher's nose. The outlaw howled, staggering back. Jack snatched up his revolver, cocked the hammer, and leveled it at Thatcher's chest. The world narrowed to that moment. Kill him, and the nightmare ends. Kill him, and nothing changes. Clara's voice echoed in his mind, sharp and clear. "You're not past anything. Not yet." Jack's finger tightened on the trigger. Thatcher sneered, daring him. With a curse, Jack shifted his aim and shot Thatcher in the leg. The outlaw screamed, dropping hard into the dust. Jack loomed over him, chest heaving. "This is my town now," he rasped. "You come back, you die." Thatcher cursed him, spitting blood. Jack holstered his revolver without another glance. Around them, the battle had broken. The outlaws fled into the night, dragging the wounded behind them. Ash Hollow stood, bloodied but unbeaten. Jack staggered back toward the saloon, the adrenaline draining from him like a tide. Clara caught him at the steps, one hand steadying him. "You made a choice," she said, voice full of something rough and shining. "Didn't feel like much of one," he muttered. She smiled, tired and beautiful. "That's how you know it mattered." Jack looked around at the battered town, at the smoke curling into the endless sky, at the people rising, stubborn and alive. Redemption wasn't a single act. It was every hard choice after, every broken breath taken when quitting would be easier. Jack Rowe wasn't done yet. The next morning broke over Ash Hollow like a slow confession, bleeding light across battered roofs and scarred earth. Smoke drifted in lazy ribbons over the town square, carrying with it the acrid memories of gunpowder and spilled blood. Jack stood at the edge of the street, battered, bruised, and breathing, staring down the long road that led out into the empty prairie. The outlaws were gone. Thatcher had been dragged off into the hills by what few loyal men he had left, wounded and cursing. The town had held. Against every odd, against every reasonable expectation, Ash Hollow still lived. Jack flexed his swollen knuckles and winced. Survival always came at a price, and he knew damn well they'd only bought a little time. Men like Thatcher didn't forget. They didn't forgive. The town stirred slowly, wounded but resilient. People moved through the wreckage with grim determination, patching bullet holes, sweeping shattered glass, gathering their dead. There were losses, too many for a place already hollowed by the years. Jack saw Otis among the fallen, his weathered face peaceful in the morning sun, a homemade cross already hammered into the earth above him. Clara moved between the survivors, her dress stained, her hair falling loose from its pins, barking orders with the quiet authority of someone who had fought and bled for every inch of ground beneath her feet. Jack watched her, feeling something shift inside him, something tender and sharp. He should leave. It would be safer for them all if he did. Thatcher would come back someday with more guns, more hate. Staying meant dragging Ash Hollow deeper into his war. Staying meant responsibility. He turned toward the livery, where his horse waited, saddle already packed. Running again? Clara's voice cut through the morning stillness. Jack didn't turn. Ain't running. Just thinking. Thinking looks an awful lot like leaving, she said, voice low but clear. Jack set his jaw, fingers curling into fists at his sides. I stay, more people die. Clara crossed the distance between them, her boots crunching on the gravel. When she spoke, her voice was softer, but no less fierce. People die anyway, whether you're here or not. The question is, what do you give them while they're still breathing? Jack looked at her, then really looked at the stubborn line of her jaw, the fire in her weary eyes, the scars she didn't bother to hide. She wasn't asking him to save them. She was asking him to fight beside them, to build something better out of the wreckage. A place. A future. The thought terrified him more than any gun barrel ever had. I ain't a good man, Clara, he said, voice hoarse. Never was. She smiled, a small, fierce thing. Good men are a dime a dozen. It's the broken ones who know what it costs that matter. Jack closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of it all, the years of blood and regret, the endless road behind him lined with failures. Maybe there was no undoing any of it. Maybe redemption wasn't about erasing the past, but about choosing every damn day to be better than he was. When he opened his eyes, Clara was still there, waiting, patient as the dawn. He exhaled slowly. All right. She nodded once, as if she'd known the answer all along. The days that followed were hard and full. Jack threw himself into rebuilding with the same grim focus he had once given to killing. He trained the townsfolk, built stronger barricades, fortified the saloon and the church and the smithy. He taught them how to fight smart, how to move together like a pack instead of panicked individuals. He fought against the ghosts clawing at him in the night, the memories of the family he had failed, the friends he'd buried. Some nights he lost, drinking himself into a stupor alone in the silver lantern. Other nights, Clara would find him and sit beside him in silence, her presence enough to drag him back from the brink. Slowly, painfully, Jack Rowe started to change. He found himself laughing at the stupid jokes the blacksmith's boy told. He found himself fixing the broken swing at the church just because a little girl cried when it broke. He found himself carving a cross for Otis's grave with hands that hadn't made anything but violence in a decade. Ash Hollow wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was real. It was worth bleeding for. Weeks later, Thatcher came back. Not with an army, not with guns blazing, but alone, broken, riding a lame horse with a white flag tied to his saddle. He stopped at the edge of town, too far for gunfire, and waited. Jack watched him from the porch of the silver lantern, Clara standing beside him. You don't have to go, she said. Jack shook his head. I do. He rode out slow, his horse kicking up little puffs of dust. Thatcher sat his horse awkwardly, one leg still ruined from the bullet Jack had given him. His face was a ruin of scars and hate. You come to die? Jack asked, voice calm. Thatcher laughed, a broken sound. Came to tell you the world ain't done with men like us. You think you won something here? It'll never last. Jack studied him, seeing not a monster, but a man too hollowed out by rage and fear to be anything else. Maybe it don't last, Jack said. But while it does, it matters. Thatcher sneered. You're soft. Jack smiled without humor. Maybe. Soft enough to let you ride outta here alive. Thatcher spat in the dust. This ain't over. It is for me, Jack said. He turned his horse without waiting for a reply, leaving Thatcher and all his poison behind. As he rode back into town, the people of Ash Hollow gathered at the street's edge, watching him. Not with fear, not with suspicion, with hope. Clara met him at the steps, her eyes shining with something fierce and bright. You did it, she said. Jack dismounted, feeling the deep ache in his bones, the scars tugging at old wounds. No, he said. We did. He looked around at the battered storefronts, the patched roofs, the children chasing each other through the dust. Ash Hollow had a future, and so did he. Jack tipped his hat back and took Clara's hand, calloused and strong, into his own. The West wasn't tamed by heroes. It was built by the broken, the stubborn, the damned who refused to fall. Jack Rowe, killer and coward, had found something he thought he had lost forever. A place to belong. A reason to stay. A chance to be better. He smiled, the expression unfamiliar but welcome. If this story moved you, he said, his voice low and sure, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Because some stories weren't meant to be buried in dust and silence. They were meant to be lived.